Hi, I'm Jim Gehring from Brown Tool Auctions, and today we're here to talk about one of the pioneers of metal planes in the 19th century, a guy with a funny name of Birdsill Holly. Holly was actually one of the leading inventors and entrepreneurs of his era. He had well over 150 patents and was often compared with his contemporary Thomas Edison, although of course today Edison is still a household name and pretty much everybody's forgotten all about Birdsill Holly. His field was not so much tools or household appliances like Edison, but municipal water systems. He was the inventor of a very revolutionary rotary pump. He developed in his hometown of Lockport an entire water distribution system which was powered by pumps rather than being gravity fed. He invented and manufactured fire engines that were powered by steam-powered pumps and fire hydrants, which are still used in some cities today. So he was a very inventive guy, but our particular concern with him is his contributions to the development of metal planes. He had only one plane patent. He took it out in 1852, and it had a number of very revolutionary concepts to it. This is an example of Holly's first plane, and you can see one of the really revolutionary features of this was instead of the blade being held in place by a wooden wedge, which is the way that all wooden planes were made and was still being used by the earliest metal planes, he has this sleeve or container here with a locking screw on it that holds the cutter in place. These were all handmade at the time. This goes back to the 1850s. You find these with knobs. You find them. This one in particular has a thumb screw, as you can see. But other than that, it's pretty well designed like a wooden plane. It's got a typical wooden plane tote and knob. But this was one of the earliest examples of Holly's work. This one comes a little later. By this point, Holly had replaced a sleeve that we saw on that one with this kind of sliding U-shaped holder that locks down the cutter. You can slide it over the cutter that locks behind the bed here. It also has got instead of the wooden tote that we saw on that plane, it's got kind of a metal strap here with a wooden cylinder here, a wooden dowel that serves as the grip. But kind of the most revolutionary thing about this particular plane is if we turn it over and look at the sole, you see these corrugations. Now, when metal planes were first being introduced as a replacement for wooden planes, people were concerned that the metal would have more friction. It wouldn't slide as smoothly over the wooden surface that you were planing. So a lot of manufacturers built these corrugations into the sole in order to reduce the amount of friction. But Holly is credited with being one of the first manufacturers to develop this technique. If you look at this closely, you can see that these grooves or corrugations were obviously handmade. They're a little uneven. They were clearly done kind of freehand. They're probably done with a drill that you just run into the wire and then just dragged it down to make these grooves. Subsequently, it's obviously a pretty labor-intensive process. And subsequent manufacturers would generally just cast, they would include the corrugations as part of the casting rather than adding them afterwards like is done on this plane. This is an interesting example of Holly's work. This is called the shoe buckle. And you can see that instead of these kind of locking lever caps that you have here, you've got this lever cap which has got these cutouts in it. It is held in place. Let me just pull this out here. It pivots on this metal rod that's peened out of both sides. So it's locked in place. It's a captive design, so this can't fall out and get lost. Then you put in you slide in the cutter underneath it. And in his case, he provided for this kind of little metal wedge. In some of the examples, this is brass. In this particular one, it's cast iron, but it's clearly original to the plane, which would get locked. You'd slide in there to hold the cutter down. There's only a handful of these around. It doesn't look, unlike these, there are more of these in existence. It doesn't look like this was ever really commercially manufactured. It's not described in any patent papers, but it clearly was made by Holly. There are some existing advertisements that tell us that. But he never really manufactured this on a wide scale. So there's only a handful of these known. However, what's interesting about this is that it led directly to the Stanley Tool Company's development of one of their iconic designs, also called the turnbuckle. This is the number 110 block plane, which was one of Stanley's earliest block planes. And you can see this was patented by Stanley's patent king, Justice Trout. And you can see it's pretty much a direct ripoff of the Holly design, although he did not credit Holly in the patent papers, and we don't know whether there was ever any dispute between them or any kind of litigation, but it's pretty much a direct copy of the Holly design. It's got the same type of open shoe buckle type lever cap held in place by the metal rod across it. The only difference is that whereas Holly had this kind of clumsy wedge that could easily fall out and get lost, the Stanley model has got this little locking screw here, which is in this particular case has got the 4 lobes on it to lock it down. This clearly was commercially produced. In fact, it was one of Stanley's more popular designs at the time. This is a Type 1. It's got the same kind of boat-shaped profile, kind of the bulging sides here that form a grip for it, and the 4-lobed locking screw. Now, interestingly enough, this isn't a Stanley product. Although I've been saying it is, this is actually a copy. And we know this because it's brass. Stanley only made these in cast iron. But it looks like somebody back in the day took a Stanley 110, made a sand casting of it, and cast his own copy in brass. We find this fairly frequently. You don't really know why. Could be just because he could, because he was, liked to, was an artisan who enjoyed making brass castings. But also, of course, brass is a little more durable. It's more inclined to dent rather than shatter if you drop it, as cast iron will tend to shatter. And it doesn't rust like cast iron does, but we find this fairly frequently. Here's a Type 2. This is a Stanley product. At this point, you see they had replaced the kind of streamlined boat-shaped profile with just a plain rectangular profile. The grips here on the side are less elaborate, and they've replaced the 4-lobed locking screw with this kind of knurled locking screw. The Type 2s are definitely much more common than the Type 1s, although both are found fairly frequently. And again, this was one of Stanley's more popular block plane designs, which apparently they ripped off directly from Birdsill Holly without giving him any credit for it. Anyhow, all 5 of these planes will be on sale at our auction on April 1st in York, Pennsylvania, and we hope to see you there.